everyone, it's Justine. Welcome to a new video for the Tonic classroom. Today I am going ahead and creating some swatches for my shimmer powders because I'm going to show you a little bit on how I work with them and all the fun that you can have with them. And by creating little swatches, you'll definitely get an idea what they look like because they do come off as the color of the bottle, absolutely, but there's also some other little bits inside of the shimmer powders that create iridescent looks, that have some maybe other tones of the color in it. So I like to have a really great idea as to which one I like most. Now, just before I started to actually play with these, I decided to lay out a piece of watercolor cardstock, add and see how they work exactly. So I poured some powder directly on dry paper and I sprayed them with the Tonic spray bottle. I then went ahead and sprayed just some regular water and then added the powder to see how that would look. And you can see that you get two very different looks depending if you add the powder to dry paper or to wet paper. You can always go into and add more powder over top and see how it reacts, but I just wanted to get an idea for how these react and how they work. I also grabbed a paintbrush and I kind of blended these in to see how I can color with them as a watercolor, just playing around and experimenting. After all, these powders have an awesome range. A little bit of powder goes a long way, so I wasn't afraid to waste a little bit to experiment. What's also important is to look at how they are when they actually dry. Were they as vibrant as before? Do they fade a bit? Does that mean I need to add a little bit more pigment? That's all up to you and your preferences. So when I work with watercolor, I always use washi tape or some sort of removable tape to keep my paper secure on a hard surface. I'm going to go ahead and add quite a bit of water this time because I want to see again how they react and how they react when we use multiple colors. So I'm going to be using Cherry Bomb here and I'm going to see how that reacts with the paper, and you can see it just really spread and sort of burst in the colors. Next up is Solar Flare. This is one of my favorite colors out of the Tonic line, and it's really a vibrant, beautiful yellow. And you can see that when it starts mixing with that Cherry Bomb, they really mix well together, and I didn't find I got much of an orange look to it. It kind of stayed the colors that they should, or actually that they technically shouldn't if they're mixing together, but really, really cool. Next up is Violet Brocade. So I was trying to pick colors that I know when they blend together, they don't really make brown mud. And so I decided to try these three out, and I keep adding water to get those colors moving. And you can really leave it up to yourself how much white space or the watercolor paper you want to see, or do you want to cover it entirely using the pigment? Now I'm going along here and adding little bits of water here and there and a little bit more powder where I feel like it's necessary. And again, just playing around with it, seeing how the colors move and getting a look that I like. So as long as I'm not making mud, I can pretty much just keep going. And I'm going to soak up any water that keeps seeping off the page using a paper towel. So anywhere where I see that water is really piling high, I can go ahead and do that. And I can see that the center of my image is already starting to dry. And the outer edges are creating a little bit of brown, but that's okay because when I soak it up, it seems to solve that issue. And also I can just cut down the panel when I'm all finished. Now here is a look at the finished panel when it is still wet, and I'm going to show you all of the dried panels at the end of the video. Now going into background number 2, I'm going to show you one of my favorite combinations from the different colors that I've experimented with. So once again, I am going to saturate my cardstock with the water. I do find that my preference definitely is to add water first and then the shimmer powder after, and instead of applying the shimmer powder to dry cardstock. Now I'm going in and I'm adding Solar Flare to the panel, again the same yellow that we used in the previous panel, and I'm going to add a couple of other colors to it as well. I'm going to add Atlantis Burst, which is the color you see here. It's another one of my favorites and it really does do that burst look to it. The name is definitely really accurate. And then I'm going to add some Blue Blitz to the background also, and this creates sort of this I don't know, in my opinion, like a Caribbean tropical sort of look to it. And depending on how much you add of each of the colors, you're going to get some really great looks here. And you can get really different looks by adding more yellows or more greens or more blues. Now what I'm going to try to do here is to add less of the extra powder and really try to move everything around with some water. So I'm just grabbing a paintbrush and just helping to fill in some of those areas that didn't get as much color. And this is a great way to spread around. You don't need any sort of artistic talent to do it, but just adding a paintbrush and just going into those areas is really, really easy to do, especially when your cardstock is as wet as mine is right now. Now you definitely don't need to just use these and apply them to water on your cardstock. You can add them to your Tonic glass mat here, spray some water in them, and they become a watercolor. So these are really versatile in that sense as well. And so I'm just grabbing my paintbrush and I'm picking it up and I'm just adding some flecks of this meteorite shower. This is a little bit of a black tone, and I think that makes it look really cool. So to compare, I just added all of those powders that I just added to my last panel onto dry cardstock, and now I'm adding water over top to see what kind of reaction that I get. And so this is another way that you can experiment to see which look that you prefer. I definitely found this method here to be a lot easier or less work than the previous one. As you can see, everything really kind of filled in nicely and I didn't have to go in and use a brush. Now that background reminded me of sort of an under the sea themed, which inspired me to create a galaxy theme. I love creating galaxy backgrounds with ink, and I thought it might be cool to try one with the shimmer bursts. So once again, just going ahead and saturating my cardstock with water. And I tried to pick colors that would really work with a galaxy background. So I started with the dark colors like Meteorite Shower and Lunar Rocket. I mean, the names are perfect for a galaxy background, right? Then I thought to myself, what kind of colors do you usually see in a galaxy? So I thought of a purple, yellow, a little bit of green. So I chose the Cherry Bomb, Atlantis Burst, and again, the Solar Flare. Went in with a little bit of the Violet Brigade again, and then I just simply started adding the water to mix and see how it was going to work. I mean, it's just an experiment at the end of the day, and it may have looked awful, or it may look really cool when it's done. So I'm just adding little bits of color again where there's some white space or maybe got a little bit too dark. And of course, when you're all finished, let it dry. You're going to top it off with a bit of white paint splatter or a white spray, and you'll be able to get your stars in no problem. Now, one thing that I did notice, of course, was when I started to dry it, it didn't look as vibrant and as cool as it did the first time around. But that doesn't mean that it's over. So you can go in, of course, and keep on soaking up that water, get a completely dry background, and then add the colors again for more layers. That way you'll build up the pigment and it won't be as light when it dries. So once again, going in, doing the exact same thing as I did the last time, activating all those colors again with some water, adding in my dark colors, and then adding in a bit of color here and there. This time I definitely held off a bit on some of the lighter colors, mainly because I thought it looked a little bit too light before and too colorful to be realistic. Then when it was all dry, you can go ahead and add yourself some white paint and just kind of flick it on. At the moment, my surface is wet, but I definitely would recommend you do it when it's dry. I think you'll get a better result than I did. But just grabbing the paint on a paintbrush and then just tapping it to flick. So after it was all dry, I grabbed my iron and I ironed the panels under some parchment paper so that they were nearly flat. And you can see what all of these great backgrounds look like. Now I can use these to die cut out of to get some really colorful, pretty dies. I can use them as backgrounds, an embossed stamp on top. I can also use them as regular backgrounds with a beautiful die on top. There's so many possibilities with backgrounds.